Nathan Cole never imagined that a simple flight would become a defining moment in his life. At 38, he was no stranger to pressure. As a self-made tech entrepreneur who had just sold his logistics company for 9 figures, he had navigated boardroom wars, all-night code sprints, and multi-million-dollar investor calls. But none of that compared to the quiet mission he embarked on that Tuesday morning, flying from Los Angeles to Atlanta, to introduce his 7-month-old daughter Nova to her grandparents for the first time. For Nathan, this wasn't just a trip. It was a statement of peace. He had stepped away from corporate life, not for luxury, but for presence, for the simple, profound role of being a father. The Summit Air first-class lounge at LAX was calm with the soft clink of glassware and hushed business chatter. Nova slept gently against his chest, wrapped in a seafoam swaddle, her tiny breaths brushing against his collarbone. He looked like any other seasoned traveler, Henley shirt, dark jeans, understated watch, but he also knew better. In spaces like these, his blackness was rarely invisible. That's when she appeared. Her name tag read, Susan. Blonde hair in a tight bun posture, sharp voice flatteringly fake. She wasn't warm, she wasn't welcoming, she was assessing. Her eyes scanned him like a barcode taking in Nova, his diaper bag, his demeanor. Then came the first request, "May I see your boarding pass?" He complied. She scanned it. Green beep. Then she hesitated. "And an ID." He blinked. "You just scanned it," he said politely. "I know. I just need to confirm." There was nothing random about it. No one else in that lounge was asked twice. But Nathan didn't argue. He knew how this game worked. You comply. You smile. You stay small so your child can stay safe. He handed over his driver's license, watching her study it like it might crack open a lie. Finally, she walked off, tension in every step. He looked down at Nova, whose tiny mouth opened in a yawn. "We're almost there," he whispered. 20 minutes later, boarding was called. He was among the first to board, eager to settle Nova, before the aisles grew crowded. But Susan was waiting at the aircraft door, clipboard in hand, fake smile gone. "Boarding pass," she said flatly. He showed it again. "Seat 2A, he confirmed. She scanned. Green. Then her arm extended across the doorway. "I'll need to see your ID again." Nathan froze, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. "I showed you less than 30 minutes ago," he said quietly. Nova still asleep on his chest. "TSA requires strict verification," she replied without flinching. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Passengers behind him murmured. The space grew tense. Nathan felt every eye on him, watching a man with a baby being treated like a suspect. Still, he didn't raise his voice. He handed her the ID again. She scanned nothing this time, just stared, then nodded. "Welcome aboard," she said, the sir conspicuously absent. Nathan entered the plush first-class cabin, gently placed Nova in the bassinet, and sat down. The seat was leather-wide and silent, but it felt like a cage. He had done nothing wrong. He had smiled. He had followed every rule. And yet the air around him felt poisoned by her presence. She hadn't finished with him. He knew it. The look in her eyes said so. She moved about the cabin like it belonged to her. Warm to others, cold to him, aggressively silent. A few passengers noticed. Most stayed out of it. One or two offered him sympathetic glances. Still, he focused on Nova. She mattered most. Then came the final straw. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Nova began to fuss. It was time to change her diaper. Nathan stood, diaper bag in hand, gently cradling his daughter. As he stepped into the aisle toward the front lavatory, Susan reappeared, blocking his path once more. "You can't go up there. The captain has restricted the front lavatory." The area was empty. There was no such announcement. "I need to change my daughter," he said calmly. "Then maybe you should have thought of that before bringing a baby on a 6-hour flight," she snapped. And in that moment, Nathan knew this wasn't about policy. This was about power. He returned to his seat, settled Nova in his lap, pulled out his phone, and made the call that would ground a plane and a career and begin something far greater. Nathan Cole sat still, his mind razor-sharp, his hands steady as they cradled his baby girl. Nova was restless now, squirming slightly, her brow furrowed, her soft whimpers breaking through the hum of the aircraft's pressurization. Nathan knew the look. She needed to be changed. The discomfort was setting in, And the last thing he wanted was for her to associate air travel with distress. That's why he had packed the diaper bag meticulously. That's why he had boarded early. That's why he had chosen Summit Air's first-class service in the first place. He didn't choose it for privilege. He chose it for peace. And yet peace had been denied to him at every turn since that morning. Susan had made sure of it, from the repeated ID checks to the passive-aggressive tone, from the fabricated TSA justification to now standing in front of the lavatory like a guard dog. Her latest words lingered in the air. Maybe you should have thought of that before bringing a baby on a 6-hour flight. She didn't just question his parenting. She dismissed his humanity. Passengers nearby turned their heads. A man in 2C wearing a tweed blazer and reading glasses furrowed his brow. Across the aisle, a woman with graying hair and sharp, empathetic eyes, whom Nathan remembered from the lounge, shook her head in quiet disbelief. Still nobody spoke. Susan's power wasn't just procedural, it was performative. She didn't want to remove him from the plane. She wanted to remind him that he didn't belong, that no matter his net worth, his resume, or his poise, he could still be put in his place. But this wasn't just about Nathan anymore. She had made Nova a target, and that changed everything. Nathan exhaled slowly. Nova whimpered again, her discomfort growing. He gently rocked her in his arms and turned back towards seat 2A. He wasn't defeated. He was calculating. He sat down. He tucked Nova into the crook of his arm. He reached into the seat pocket, ignoring the glowing airplane mode required reminder on the screen. His fingers moved with quiet precision as he unlocked his phone. At the top of his favorites list was a name he hadn't dialed in over a year: Everett Sterling, CEO of Summit Air, the man whose company Nathan Software had helped scale. The connection clicked almost instantly. Nathan, came the gravelly voice on the other end. "Is everything all right? It's 4:00 a.m. here in Bear." Nathan's voice was level, composed. "Apologies for the early call, Everett. I wouldn't be reaching out if this weren't urgent." Immediately, the tone on the other end shifted. "Go ahead." "I'm on Flight 8112, Nathan began. "Los Angeles to Atlanta. I'm in seat 2A with my daughter Nova. We're being harassed by the lead flight attendant. Her name is Susan. The behavior started in the lounge and has escalated steadily since we boarded. I've been asked for ID 3 separate times. I've been denied access to the lavatory for a diaper change. And just now I was told loudly that I don't fit the profile." Silence. Nathan continued. "This is no longer just an unpleasant experience. This is discrimination. It's targeted, sustained, and now public. I know what this looks like. I know what it feels like. And I'm telling you, this is a liability for Summit Air that is unfolding in real time." Everett didn't respond immediately. Nathan could hear him shifting, likely sitting up in bed, mentally jumping from sleep to crisis mode. "Do you want to file a complaint?" Everett finally asked. "No," Nathan said firmly. "I want the flight turned around." There was a pause, not out of confusion but out of gravity. "Nathan, this is a full transcontinental flight. We're talking about 200-plus passengers, coordination with ATC, operational fallout, media backlash. It's not just a cost issue, I know exactly what it is." Nathan cut in, his voice sharper now, still quiet but unflinching. "Your airline runs on my tech. You use our predictive routing, our delay forecasting, our logistical overlays. You know I understand the cost." He paused, letting the weight of the next words settle like a stone. "What you don't understand is what this will cost you if it reaches the press." Everett inhaled slowly. "Go on. I'm not threatening you, Everett. I'm giving you an opportunity. Right now you can demonstrate that Summit Air is more than just a luxury brand with shiny interiors. You can prove it has a conscience. You can prove that when a black father is humiliated in first class in front of his daughter, your company doesn't offer an apology after the fact. It intervenes in the moment. I want the flight grounded. I want a corporate representative, not airport security, to meet me at the gate. I want full documentation of this incident, and I want Susan relieved of her duties before we touch the ground. And when I speak to the press, which I will if this is not resolved, I will tell them Summit Air had a choice between upholding dignity or maintaining schedule." The silence on the other end was longer this time, then finally understood. "I'll expect confirmation within 5 minutes, Nathan said. I'll remain seated." He ended the call. Across from him, Susan walked past again, her coffee pot rattling on the cart. She sneered as she passed, muttering just loud enough for him to hear, "Always has to be about you, doesn't it?" Nathan said nothing, but deep inside the engine of justice was already turning. Exactly 3 minutes later, a quiet chime echoed through the cabin. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady but with an unmistakable edge of unease. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen operational circumstances, we will not be continuing to Atlanta. We are returning to LAX. Please remain seated and await further instruction." The cabin fell into hushed shock. Whispers erupted, confused glances were exchanged. But in first class, where the tension had been building like a thundercloud, several passengers turned not to the front, but to seat 2A. Susan stood frozen near the galley, her face drained of color. Her grip tightened on the coffee pot, and then slowly, visibly trembled. It took her almost 10 seconds to process what had just occurred. Nathan looked directly at her for the first time in over an hour. He said nothing. She blinked as if trying to convince herself it was a coincidence. It wasn't, and she knew it. The flight back to Los Angeles was surreal. Susan disappeared behind the curtain of the forward galley, leaving the younger flight attendant. Bento managed the cabin alone. His hands shook as he handed out water bottles and blankets. He didn't speak much, but once as he gently refilled Nathan's glass, he whispered, Sorry." Nathan gave a subtle nod. He wasn't here for apologies. He was here for consequences. When the plane landed, it did not taxi to the usual terminal. Instead, it rolled to a quiet, closed-off tarmac bay near a private hangar. Outside the window, Nathan spotted them, two figures, one in a dark navy suit, the other in a captain's uniform. A knock at the cabin door. The captain stepped in first. "Susan," he said, his voice low and firm. "With me." She emerged slowly, hair disheveled, face pale, her composure broken. The woman in the navy suit addressed the cabin. "My name is Lauren McAllister. I'm Vice President of In-Flight Operations for Summit Air. On behalf of our CEO, Everett Sterling, I extend our sincerest apologies for the events that transpired on this flight. We are conducting an immediate internal investigation." She turned to Nathan. "Mr. Cole, your vehicle is waiting. We'll handle everything from here." As Nathan stood cradling Nova gently against his chest, Susan met his eyes one final time. "You've ruined my life," she spat, her voice ragged. Nathan didn't blink. "No," he said. "You did." He stepped off the plane into the California sun, into the storm he had orchestrated. And it was only just beginning. The moment Nathan Cole stepped off that plane, a ripple was set in motion, one that would swell into a wave strong enough to knock down walls corporate leaders had spent decades building to protect themselves. It wasn't just about a rude flight attendant anymore. It was about a system that quietly permitted her behavior. A system that rewarded compliance over conscience. A system Nathan had once worked alongside, but never truly inside. That was about to change. A black Cadillac Escalade idled on the tarmac just beyond the portable stairway. A Summit Air operations manager opened the rear passenger door as Nathan descended Nova, dozing peacefully in his arms, her head resting against his shoulder. The sun had just begun its descent behind the hangars of LAX, casting long shadows on the runway. But for Nathan, this was only the beginning of a very long day. Inside the vehicle, a chilled bottle of water and a neatly sealed Summit Air envelope awaited him. Inside the envelope, a personal handwritten apology note from Everett Sterling. On hotel stationery, hastily written, sincere and incomplete. "I'm sorry," it read, "but sorry won't fix this." Nathan didn't respond. Not yet. He wasn't done listening. He spent the next 48 hours watching the world react. The story spread like wildfire. A tech investor in seat 2C, Greg Walker, a well-known name in Palo Alto, had quietly recorded the final altercation between Susan and Nathan. The video, posted to X, formerly Twitter, was 45 seconds of pure, unfiltered reality. No edits, no spin. Just a black father asking to change his daughter's diaper and being told you don't fit the profile. The video racked up over 12 million views in less than 24 hours. Comments flooded in. "I've flown first class for 20 years. I've never been asked for ID twice." This was racism, plain and simple. This man stayed calm through everything. That's what real strength looks like. Imagine treating a father with a baby like a criminal, on camera, and thinking it wouldn't matter. By the end of the second day, Susan's full name had been leaked. Internet sleuths unearthed problematic posts from her past remarks about certain types of people flying out of their league. Old photos surfaced from political rallies, online comments dripping with dog whistles. Summit Air had no choice but to formally terminate her. But even that wasn't enough to stop the public fury. Nathan didn't say a word. Not on social media, not in interviews. He was waiting. Because this wasn't about noise. It was about leverage. On the morning of the third day, Nathan arrived at Summit Air's corporate headquarters in Denver. He didn't come alone. His legal counsel, his operations chief, and his former CTO from the software firm he had sold. The message was clear. Nathan was not just a passenger. He was a systems thinker, a strategist, a builder, and he had come to rebuild something that was broken. Everett Sterling greeted him in the 26th floor boardroom. He looked haggard, not performatively tired, but genuinely exhausted. The viral firestorm had already knocked Summit Air's stock price down by 9%. Advertisers were pulling pre-roll placements. Airline unions were demanding internal review boards. Shareholders were calling emergency votes. "This is catastrophic," Everett admitted, motioning for Nathan to sit. "But I want you to know, I take full responsibility." "No," Nathan replied evenly. "You take accountability, but responsibility comes next." Everett blinked. "What do you mean I don't want your apology?" Nathan said. "I want your platform. I want this moment, this catastrophe, as you put it, to mean something. Otherwise, Susan becomes just another scapegoat, and Summit Air remains the same until the next video, the next father, the next humiliation." Everett leaned forward. "So what do you want?" Nathan reached into his briefcase and slid a printed document across the table. It was a proposal, thick-bound, detailed. The Nova Initiative, an entirely new model for corporate empathy and inclusion. Not a passive HR policy, not a one-day sensitivity workshop with PowerPoint slides and catered lunch. This was a full-spectrum cultural reboot designed to reach every employee, ground staff, flight, cruise executives, customer service, even contractors. Key components included immersive VR simulations that let employees experience discrimination from the perspective of passengers. Testimonial-based curriculum using real accounts of racial profiling in corporate environments. Ethical decision labs facilitated by behavioral psychologists, teaching employees how to respond to bias in real time. Quarterly empathy audits, data-driven anonymous reports assessing cultural health and employee sentiment. Cross-department accountability units where cabin crews and ground teams evaluated each other's performance. And at the heart of it all, people, not policies. Nathan pointed to a name listed as an early advisory member. "Ben," he said, "the junior flight attendant on my flight." He didn't say much, but he didn't escalate. And when things fell apart, he showed more character than the person in charge. That's who you build around. Not the loudest, not the most polished, the most willing to grow. Everett flipped through the document page by page. The scope was ambitious, the budget even more so. High seven figures to implement the first 18 months. But the potential, if real, was transformative. "And you'd help us build this?" he asked. Nathan nodded. "Not for you, not for Summit Air, for Nova, for every child who's going to grow up in this country with questions about whether they belong. I want to help design the answer." Everett closed the folder. "Courtroom in." The press release dropped 5 days later. Summit Air announces the Nova Initiative, a groundbreaking empathy-first reform program developed in partnership with Nathan Cole and Cole Systems to transform bias response across the aviation industry. It made the front page of USA Today, Forbes, and the New York Times business section. But more than that, it sparked conversation, real conversation. And then something unexpected happened. Other airlines followed. Within 2 months, 3 competing airlines reached out to license portions of the Nova curriculum. Cole Systems negotiated open-access versions of the VR modules for nonprofit use. University psychology departments contacted Nathan to collaborate on future studies. The FAA issued a public statement encouraging carriers to adopt modern empathy training tools to meet the evolving needs of diverse passenger populations. What started as a confrontation between a father and a flight attendant had become a case study in corporate transformation. But Nathan remained grounded. He refused all TV interviews. He declined speaking fees. His only public remarks came at a quiet Summit Air internal conference 6 weeks later, where he stood beside Benthi, former junior attendant, now promoted to senior training advisor. "I'm not here to be thanked," Nathan said that morning. "I'm here to remind you that systems don't change because we apologize louder. They change because we decide together that the people in charge of comfort and safety should not be the people who make others feel unsafe." He paused, looked around the room. "You can train for turbulence. You can't train for trust, but you can earn it, one flight at a time." The applause was quiet, but it wasn't polite. It was personal. Ben stepped forward, visibly emotional. "That day on the plane, I froze," he said. "I didn't speak up, but I've thought about it every day since, and now I've found my voice. I want to help others find theirs." Nathan smiled. "That's all this is. One person finding their voice and then handing the mic to the next." 1 year later, Susan Collins was a ghost. She lived in a small rental apartment in a town where no one recognized her name because she had changed it. Her hair was shorter now, her wardrobe plain, her job unglamorous, folding linens at an industrial laundry facility. She watched as the world moved on without her. Watched Nathan's face appear in news blurbs about tech for good. Watched Ben give a TEDx talk about psychological safety. Watched Summit Air stock climb higher than it had pre-scandal levels. And some days when the machines hummed too loudly and the ache in her shoulders grew too sharp, she whispered those 5 words she had once said with such icy certainty. "You don't fit the profile." Only now she said them to herself. Meanwhile, Nova was walking. She toddled through Nathan's sunlit home office, babbling words that barely made sense, chasing the soft shadow of her father as he adjusted a VR headset, finalizing a new simulation scenario for the Nova initiative. He picked her up, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You belong everywhere, baby girl." Everywhere. And in that moment, you understood something simple. He hadn't just turned a plane around. He had turned the culture, and more importantly, he had turned the page. 6 months after the Nova initiative launched, Nathan Cole was no longer just a man who had grounded a flight. He was a symbol, reluctantly so. His image appeared in thought leadership columns, corporate diversity panels, and case studies at Harvard Business School. The viral video that had once outraged millions had now become the opening slide of PowerPoint presentations on workplace transformation. But symbols, Nathan had learned, came at a cost. He didn't set out to be the face of corporate empathy. He didn't crave the spotlight. In fact, most days he wanted the opposite. His days were split between consulting sessions with airline HR teams, reviewing psychological safety data dashboards, and chasing Nova around the living room. Yet every time he declined an interview or canceled a conference appearance, someone accused him of wasting the platform. "You started something," one journalist emailed him. "You can't just walk away now." But Nathan wasn't walking away. He was walking carefully, because now the resistance had begun. It started subtly. A LinkedIn article titled "The Dangerous Cost of Overcorrection: When Empathy Undermines Excellence" began circulating in executive circles. A conservative news host referred to Nathan as the man who weaponized a crying baby to cancel an airline. Corporate whisper networks buzzed with CEOs privately venting about yet another checklist initiative shoved down their throats. Nathan didn't react publicly. He stayed focused on impact, not optics. But he knew movements always hit turbulence when they reached cruising altitude. One cold January morning, his inbox lit up with an invitation from the National Aviation Ethics Summit held annually in Washington, D.C. It was a closed-door event, CEOs, regulators, union heads, and lobbyists. Nathan wasn't just being asked to attend. He was being asked to deliver the keynote. He stared at the screen for a long time. The timing was brutal. Nova had just recovered from a respiratory virus. His parents were visiting. His body was tired, his mind fatigued. But then he thought about what Ben had said just 2 months earlier after visiting a struggling regional airline in the Midwest. "They don't hate the program," Ben had said. "They just don't know what it's like to feel something until they're inside it." Nathan accepted the invitation. The conference hall at the Willard Intercontinental was packed with prestige. Rows of suits, polished leather briefcases, and press passes. Behind the curtain, Nathan adjusted the lapel mic. The event coordinator, a woman named Amy, looked at him nervously. "You sure you're okay with this?" He smiled faintly. "No, but that's why I'm the right person to walk out there." When he stepped on stage, the applause was polite, but measured, respectful, not enthusiastic. Many in the room had seen the viral video. Fewer had read the 80-page Nova Initiative playbook, and most Nathan suspected were still skeptical. He spoke without notes. "Am not a public speaker," he began, voice calm, clear. "I build things. I spent 10 years building software to help airlines solve their most expensive problems. Fuel efficiency, cargo routing, passenger flows. I spoke your language, until the day your language didn't speak for me." He paused. You could feel the air tighten. "I was told I didn't fit the profile. While holding my daughter, in a seat I paid for, in an industry I helped optimize." A few eyes dropped, a few jaws set tight. "I didn't ask for revenge. I asked for redesign." He then told them what they didn't expect: data. Since the rollout of the Nova Initiative, customer satisfaction scores in first class rose by 23%. Employee retention among flight attendants improved by 18%. Passenger complaints involving bias or profiling dropped by 47%. Operational efficiency increased in crew management due to improved internal morale. "This isn't about feelings," Nathan said. "It's about performance. When people feel safe, they serve better. When passengers feel seen, they return. When trust rises, costs fall." He paused again, letting the silence do what applause couldn't. "This isn't woke. It's wise. And it works." The applause this time was fuller, not unanimous, but honest. After the talk, executives lined up to shake his hand. Some asked for meetings. Others asked for proof of concept. One said, "You're changing the fabric of this industry." But later that evening, as Nathan scrolled through his phone, a different kind of message arrived. It was a text from Camilla Shore, CEO of Meridian Era boutique luxury carrier, with routes between California and the Northeast. "Nathan, I admire what you're doing, but I can't implement your program, not without losing my board. They think it's too political, too divisive, and they're not wrong. Can we talk?" The text was polite but loaded. Nathan replied, "Let's." 2 days later, they met at a rooftop restaurant in Manhattan. Camilla was brilliant, Stanford MBA, multilingual, impeccably composed. She wasn't cruel. She was cornered. "My board thinks empathy is code for liability," she confessed, stirring her espresso. "They're asking me if we're paying to teach our staff how to cry, or how to avoid lawsuits." Nathan didn't flinch. "And what do you think we're teaching?" She looked at him. Her mask dropped just a little. "I think you're teaching us how to be brave, and that terrifies people." Nathan nodded slowly. "Then we need to make bravery a value, not a liability." They spoke for 2 hours. He didn't push her. He offered her a pilot program, 6 months, 3 regional routes, data collection only. No PR, no press, quiet transformation. She agreed. The pilot would begin in March. But not everyone was interested in quiet. The backlash came sharp and fast. A viral YouTube video accused Nathan of corporate shaming. A political PAC ran an ad calling DEI programs attacks on merit. A former pilot-turned-commentator posted a thread on X with 50,000 shares at "Nathan Cole is dismantling professionalism in aviation." And then one day, Nova came home from preschool and asked, "Daddy, are you a bad guy?" Nathan froze. "Why would you ask that, baby?" "Because one kid said you're ruining planes." It hit like turbulence. Not on his skin, in his bones. He held her close that night and didn't say much. But later, alone, he wrote a sentence on a sticky note and taped it to his desk. "If they fight you for teaching people to care, you're on the right flight path." The next morning, he woke early, opened his laptop, and began drafting the next evolution of the Nova Initiative, Nova Elevate. It would go beyond airlines, into hospitality, healthcare, schools, public service. He contacted ethics professors, trauma counselors, former TSA agents. It wasn't about replicating empathy. It was about redefining excellence. In June, Nathan returned to Summit Air headquarters to speak at their leadership summit. Ben introduced him with a voice full of warmth, now executive director of cultural strategy. Nathan didn't talk numbers. He told a story about Nova, about that night, about what happens when the very people you're fighting for question your motives because the world around them doesn't understand your message. He paused, then said, "If empathy is a burden, it's one ill carry. And if legacy is what you leave behind, then let this be mine. I want my daughter to live in a world where care is not a risk, it's a requirement." That line would later appear on an airport mural in Atlanta. in policy guides, in leadership workshops across industries. 1 year later, Nova was 5. And one morning during a family flight from San Francisco to Boston, she climbed into her father's lap and pointed at the in-flight magazine. Her eyes lit up. "Daddy, that's Ben." On the cover, Ben smiling, standing in front of a training simulator. The headline, "The Flight to Empathy, How One Airline Turned Crisis into Culture." Nathan smiled. "Yes, baby, that's Ben." She looked up at him. "He's your friend." "Has more than that," Nathan said. "He's proof we can change." And that's what this story was always about. Not grounding planes, not ending careers, not even building programs. It was about asking a question louder than any turbulence. What kind of world do we land in when we teach people to see each other? Nathan Cole's journey wasn't over, but his legacy, it had already taken flight. By the end of the second year, the NOVA initiative was no longer just an aviation ethics program. It had become a framework, a philosophy, a cultural shift with ripple effects spreading across industries like rings in a still lake. Hospitals began adapting its modules to train nurses on patient dignity in high-stress ER settings. Luxury hotels requested licensing for frontline concierge staff. One metropolitan police department quietly reached out asking for simulations focused on civilian interaction, particularly scenarios involving parents and children. It was the kind of scale Nathan Cole had never intended but could no longer ignore. The phrase NOVA certified became a shorthand in corporate HRA mark of not only compliance, but competence in care. Airlines that had once resisted now called for strategic partnerships. CEOs who had dismissed him 2 years earlier were now citing the NOVA effect in earnings calls. And yet for Nathan, none of it felt settled. Because movements don't just grow, they mutate. And somewhere between recognition and responsibility, Nathan began to feel a pressure that had nothing to do with numbers or KPIs. It had to do with identity. In spring, an executive producer from a major streaming network reached out with a proposal for a docuseries, Altitude: The Man Who Grounded a Plane and Raised a Standard. "We're talking Emmy potential," the email promised. 6 episodes, high production reenactments, testimony, real impact. Nathan declined. A month later, another call came, not from media this time, but from the Aspen Integrity Forum and Elite, convening of thinkers, economists, and former heads of state. He was invited to open the event with a TED-style keynote. He declined again. A friend asked him why. Nathan stared at the floor for a long time, then answered softly, "Because I'm starting to feel like the brand instead of the builder." At home, Nova was growing fast. She was 5 now, curious, bold, with a brain wired like her father's. She once asked him why clouds follow planes. "They don't follow us," Nathan replied. "We move through them." She nodded like she understood something bigger than weather. But it was Nova's birthday party in June that stirred something new inside Nathan. The backyard was decorated in soft lavender and white. There were bubbles, cake, laughter, friends and family. Yet as he stepped away to answer a another ethics board request, the caught Nova looking at him. She wasn't sad, but she wasn't smiling either. That night after the guests had gone, he tucked her into bed and said, "Did you have fun?" She nodded. "But you were on your phone a lot," she added. He froze. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "It's okay," she said. "I just wanted you to fly with me today." The words landed like a whisper through turbulence. Gentle, undeniable. He sat in the dark afterward, thinking not about Susan or stock prices or panels. He thought about presence, how even purpose can become noise, how even justice can drown out joy. And for the first time since the movement began, Nathan asked himself, was this sustainable or was this survivable? That question only grew louder weeks later when a senator from Oregon publicly invited Nathan to testify before a congressional subcommittee on ethical training for transportation and public service employees. The hearing would be nationally televised. Nathan would be the headline witness. This was the pivot point. If he said yes, it would mark the beginning of a very different chapter, not just private reform, but public policy. The NOVA initiative could become legislation, but it would also become partisan. His team debated it for days. Ben, ever the optimist, encouraged it. "This is the step from inspiration to infrastructure," he said. Nathan's counsel warned otherwise. "You'll be dragged, questioned, not about your ideas, but about your worth, your motives, your daughter." That last part turned Nathan's stomach. He asked for 72 hours to think. During that window, he flew to Atlanta to visit his parents. The flight was quiet, the crew polite. A young flight attendant with a soft smile leaned in and said, "Sir, your seat has extra pillows. Nova requested it." He blinked. "How did you—" "She left a note on your reservation," the attendant said. "We all read it. She wrote, 'My daddy works hard. Please make him comfortable. He always thinks about everyone else.'" Nathan laughed, then cried, because suddenly the dilemma wasn't about scale or sacrifice. It was about why he had started all this in the first place, to create a world she wouldn't have to fight in. He returned to D.C. The morning of the hearing, he stood outside the Capitol in a charcoal gray suit holding Novus, drawing in his Honda plane flying through a giant heart. She had slipped it into his briefcase. Inside, the hearing began. It was broadcast live. Commentators lined up. Critics tweeted. But Nathan didn't perform. He spoke. Not about outrage, but about outcomes. Not about shame, but about shared stakes. He said, "We don't need to legislate guilt. We need to institutionalize empathy. Not because it's soft, but because it's strategic. In aviation, we have minimum safe altitudes. Maybe we need the same in how we treat each other." The chamber fell silent. Then, "Thank you, Mr. Cole." That hearing became the inflection point. 3 weeks later, the CARE Act, Corporate Accountability and Relational Empathy, was introduced voluntary, but strongly encouraged training standards for industries receiving federal contracts. The NOVA initiative would be its model. The public response was divided. Some hailed Nathan as a pioneer. Others labeled him a bureaucratic threat. Talk shows flared. Op-eds clashed. Twitter raged. But beneath the noise, something real was taking root. One New York City school district reached out to adapt NOVA for fifth-grade empathy lessons. A Detroit automotive manufacturer built NOVA rooms where employees could decompress after aggressive customer interactions. A nursing union in Seattle created NOVA-endorsed empathy modules for new hires. Nathan watched all this unfold, but he didn't speak to the press. He just watched. And then one morning, Ben knocked on his office door. "You okay?" he asked. Nathan looked up, weary but clear-eyed. "I don't want to build this forever," he said. Ben paused. "Then don't." "You think it'll live without me?" Ben smiled. "It already has." Later that week, Nathan wrote a letter. Not to the board, not to the press. To Nova. He read it to her that night. "I built something to make the world softer," he said. "But now it's time for me to be soft where it matters most." She hugged him, quiet and strong. "Can we fly just to fly?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Anywhere you want." Nathan stepped down from daily leadership at the NOVA initiative that fall. He appointed Ben as executive director. The team expanded. The programs grew. But Nathan, he started writing children's books, stories about kindness, curiosity, courage. His first book was titled Clouds Don't Follow Planes. The dedication read, "To the little girl who taught me how to land." 2 years later, a young employee at a bank in Chicago greeted a customer who looked frustrated. "I've had a long day," the customer snapped. The employee smiled, nodded, and said, "Take your time. I've got space." She had taken the NOVA training. She didn't quote it. She lived it. And somewhere in a small home near the coast, Nathan Cole made NOVA breakfast, watched her color, and smiled. Because the work had worked. Because kindness had scaled. Because he chose to stop flying for everyone else and finally landed with the one who mattered most. 10 years had passed since the day Nathan Cole turned around a Boeing 777. The turbulence that followed, the hearings, the headlines, the backlash, had long since faded from public memory. But the ripple effect never stopped. The NOVA initiative, now renamed simply NOVA, had grown far beyond aviation. It had become a foundational system for applied empathy across multiple sectors: healthcare, hospitality, education, even corrections. In cities like Minneapolis, Charlotte, and Sacramento, NOVA-certified departments were posting real measurable gains, not in press releases but in patient outcomes, complaint reductions, and community trust. But Nathan, he had stepped away. Completely. After his resignation, he and Nova had moved to a coastal town outside Santa Barbara. No more boardrooms, no more cameras, just sand, early mornings, and fatherhood. And for a while that was enough. But Nova grew as children do. At 15, she was everything he wasn't at that age: expressive, fearless, outspoken. Her mind was wired like his sharp strategic, but her spirit, that was her mother's legacy, open-hearted, unafraid to lead with feeling. One summer afternoon, as they sat on their wraparound porch watching the sea fog roll in, Nova asked, "Do you ever miss it?" Nathan looked up from his sketch pad. "Miss what being?" Heard, she said carefully. "The platform. The power." He thought for a moment, then smiled gently. "Not really. I got louder than I ever wanted to. And then I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back and let someone else speak." Nova nodded, but he could see something stirring behind her eyes, something unspoken. That night she left a folded piece of paper on his desk. It was a printed flyer. Student-led Civic Symposium, UC Berkeley topic. What does it mean to inherit a movement? And beneath it in her handwriting, "I want to go." As me, Nathan didn't hesitate. "You should." Nova's entrance into public consciousness wasn't viral. It was intentional, quietly powerful. Her speech at the symposium didn't mention the Nova Initiative until the final paragraph. She spoke about hallway moments in high school, about a Muslim classmate who transferred after being mocked, about a class trip to a museum where the black students were followed by security, about her own name. "My name," she said, "was once a movement. Before I even understood what it meant, people were whispering it in rooms I didn't walk into." The room was silent. But names aren't movements. They're mirrors. And I've spent 15 years trying to figure out whether I was supposed to reflect the legacy or redirect it. That line made its way onto dozens of blogs, but it was not until she launched Nova Next, a youth-led branch of the program focused on peer-to-peer dialogue in simulation labs in high schools, that her voice began to stand apart from her father's. This wasn't top-down reform. It was grassroots redesign. Nova's signature program switched Siatsa role reversal simulation, where students experienced a full school day assigned randomly to another student's daily challenges: economic, cultural, linguistic, or physical. The pilot was run in 3 high schools in Oakland. Disciplinary referrals dropped by 42%. Student-reported empathy scores rose by 38%. Graduation rates among previously at-risk students increased the following year by 11%. The data was clear, but so was the emotion. A short film of a student crying in the simulation after realizing her blind assumptions about her classmates' daily struggle went viral on TikTok. "You never know what someone's carrying until you walk in their life," the girl sobbed. By 17, Nova was on track to attend Stanford. But instead, she deferred. Not because she was unsure, because she was ready. She took a fellowship offer from the Cole Center for Applied Empathy, now headquartered in Denver and run by a new generation of ethicists, data scientists, and behavioral analysts. Her role wasn't ceremonial. She designed and launched Nova Play interactive empathy games for middle schoolers, coded in Unity, designed to run on tablets in underfunded school districts. She partnered with inner-city school networks, pediatric hospitals, even a juvenile justice rehab program in Florida. It wasn't just outreach, it was design justice. Meanwhile, Nathan watched with quiet awe. He sat in the back row of her first national conference presentation. His name never mentioned, his presence unnoticed. Afterwards, she joined him at the coffee stand. "How'd I do?" she asked casually. He didn't say much, just reached out, touched her shoulder, and said, "You were original." Nova grinned. "Finally." But with visibility came scrutiny. A media outlet ran a piece, "Legacy Baby or Real Reformer." Another published an op-ed, "Can we trust the daughter of the man who took down an airline?" It stung, but Nova wasn't rattled. She tweeted one sentence: "They thought I was a shadow. Turns out I was a sunrise." That line was printed on t-shirts by the next morning. The defining moment came a year later. Nova, now 18, was invited to the Global Forum on Emotional Intelligence and Public Policy hosted in Geneva. She accepted. Her panel was titled "Designing Systems with Empathy as a Primary Input." She opened her remarks with a memory. "I don't remember the flight. I was 7 months old. But my dad does, and the world does." That moment, the one where he picked up a phone at 35,000 feet and called a CEO, was a moment of courage. But it wasn't the most important one. She paused. The most important moment was what he did after the plane landed. She outlined how he stepped back, not forward. How he planted a seed and walked away so it could grow without him. How legacy is not what you build, but what you leave space for. Leadership, she said, isn't about holding the mic forever. It's about handing it off while the music still matters. The crowd stood. It was no longer about Nathan. It was no longer about the incident. It was about what followed. Later that year, on the 10th anniversary of Flight 718, Summit Air renamed their flagship plane, the NC Nova. A letter was printed in the back of every seat pocket. This aircraft is named in honor of the moment a child changed the course of corporate history, not with a scream but with silence, and in honor of the man who saw that moment not as a victory but as an invitation. Welcome aboard. Nathan flew on that plane once. Quietly, seat 2A. Same as before. Ben was now a VP. He greeted Nathan on the jet bridge with a simple nod and said, "We saved this seat for you." Nathan smiled, sat down, and looked out the window. No turbulence, no cameras, just flight. That night back home, he stood on the porch again. Nova joined him now, preparing to enter Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. "Do you ever regret walking away?" she asked. Nathan didn't answer at first, then said, "No, because you walked in." She smiled. "What if one day I walk away? Then I hope someone walks in after you," he replied. Legacy isn't about permanence. It's about momentum. And the Nova movement had never been about a plane. It was about the people who refused to let it land where it started. It was about a whisper that became a wave, a father who chose love over noise, a daughter who turned empathy into architecture, and a world that finally listened. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Nathan Cole returned to the airport where it all began. No press, no entourage, just one man, one terminal, and a memory. He stood outside Gate 14 at LAX, the same place where years ago a voice coded in condescension had asked him to verify who he was again and again. The same place where he had looked down at his daughter, then only 7 months old, and realized that the quiet war he was fighting wasn't just his, it would one day be hers. Today, Nova wasn't in his arms. She was on the other side of the country delivering a commencement speech at Harvard, where she was graduating with honors in public leadership and ethical systems. The child who had once been the reason for the storm had become the eye of a new one, calm, clear, unstoppable. Nathan sat near the windows, sipping coffee from a paper cup, watching the planes lift into the pale morning sky. The world had changed since that day, or maybe it had just caught up with itself. There was no need for headlines now. The Nova initiative was standard policy across 80% of major U.S. airlines. International carriers had adopted its empathy training as part of their onboarding curriculum. Public schools, pediatric hospitals, courtrooms, and even federal agencies were quietly integrating what had once been considered too idealistic. But none of that was why Nathan returned. He wasn't here for the legacy. He was here for closure. He boarded a morning flight LAX to Atlanta. Same route. Same seat 2A. The cabin crew was warm, diverse, present. When he handed his boarding pass to the lead attendant, a black woman in her early 30s, she looked up with a curious smile. "Mr. Cole, 2A, she said, then paused. "You probably don't remember this, but your daughter came to speak at my community college when I was 19. Nathan blinked. "She said something that stayed with me," the woman continued. "She said, you don't have to wait for a title to treat someone like they matter." That line changed the way I moved in the world. Nathan smiled. "She always had better lines than me." The attendant laughed softly. "You gave her the sky, Mr. Cole. She just learned how to fly." Nathan took his seat. The engines hummed. The plane lifted. And this time there was no fear, no tension, just stillness. At cruising altitude, he looked out the window. The clouds didn't seem to follow him this time. They drifted quietly and differently, beautiful in their own way. He reached into his carry-on and pulled out an envelope. Inside, a letter from Nova. She had written it the night before her speech. "Juana, sometimes I think about that flight hour, first one, and how none of it was supposed to happen. You weren't supposed to be questioned. You weren't supposed to be interrupted. You weren't supposed to call anyone. But you did, and the world shifted. Not because you shouted, but because you refused to be silent. Not for yourself, but for me. And now it's my turn. Wherever I go, whatever I build, know this. You didn't just ground a plane. You gave me a launch pad. I love you, always." Nova Nathan stared at the letter until the words blurred into each other. Not from emotion, from light. Because sometimes when the sun hits just right above the clouds, everything begins to glow. He folded the paper, rested his head back, and finally, after years of turbulence, triumph, transformation, he slept peacefully. Because in the end, justice isn't loud. It doesn't always come with sirens or speeches. Sometimes it boards quietly, holds a child, makes a call, and changes everything. Final message to the viewer. If this story moved you, if you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in a space you had every right to be in, or if you've ever had to fight quietly, not for yourself but for someone who couldn't speak yet, know this: the world changes one choice at a time. And sometimes the most radical act is to stay calm, stand firm, and speak gently into the storm. So we ask you, what will your next flight carry, and who will you choose to protect along the way? Nathan Cole's journey reminds us that the most powerful acts are often the quietest. In a world that rewards volume, he chose composure. Faced with discrimination, he didn't explode. He responded with dignity. That response didn't just protect his daughter in the moment, it planted a seed of change that reshaped entire industries. His story teaches us that courage doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it holds a baby in one hand and justice in the other. For those of us who've lived through decades of progress and pain, we know that true change is rarely instant. It comes from patient resolve, from using our influence, not to dominate but to uplift. Nathan didn't chase revenge. He built legacy. And when his time to lead passed, he stepped aside with grace, allowing the next generation to rise. The lesson power is not in what you hold, but in what you pass on. Empathy isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And leadership isn't always about being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it's about being the calmest one. If you've ever wondered whether you're too small to make a difference, remember: one father, one phone call, and one quiet stand changed the course of countless lives. What would you have done in Nathan's shoes? Would you have stayed silent or stood up with quiet strength like he did for your child, for justice, for the future? Nathan didn't seek applause. He simply refused to accept injustice as normal. And in doing so, he became a voice for so many who've been silenced for too long. Now, we want to hear your voice. Do you believe Nathan made the right choice? Should he return to public leadership, or has he already done enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What would you say to Nathan if he were sitting beside you right now? Your words matter. Your support matters. And if this story moved you, if you believe quiet courage can change the world, comment the number 1 below. Let's show the world that empathy, dignity, and grace still have a place in leadership.